I'm going to invite you, before we begin the message, invite you to take a moment and prepare yourself for the Easter message. Pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our salvation. For we ask this in the name of the risen Christ. Amen. Have you ever had one of those times, I guess when you have time, similar to right now, when you sit and you're undisturbed or whatever, and you kind of delve into your mind and you reflect on life, and in that process you wonder, had you changed some decisions or gone here or gone there, what life would have been like and how it might have been different, and a decision led you here, and what it would have been like if you'd made a different decision and been taken a different way. It is the what if question. What if I had behaved better in school? What if I had studied harder or tried harder or applied myself more? When I was in public schools years ago, my parents, being of German background, spoke German whenever they didn't want their children to understand what mom and dad were talking about. So, being a smart guy, I thought I would take German in high school, which I did. And we actually had a German who taught German. His name was Herr Michalke. And Herr Michalke was a soldier in the Second World War, and he bore the physical remnants of being a soldier. He had these two fingers missing, so he always sat like this and pondered, and his face had been, anyway. He had old school all about him, which was not always a good mix with American students. But he knew my father. He knew my father was bilingual and could speak and preach in German. And he looked at me one day and he said, "Kiet," because Germans don't say TH, "Kiet, you could be good student. Maybe get D, maybe C, but you screw around too much." True story. We all did. But what if I had tried harder? It's the big question of life, is it not? What if we had gone to a different college or school? What if we'd had different parents? What if we had been born or grown up in another town? What if we'd had different friends along the way? What if we had married someone else, chosen a different profession, said no to one job and yes to another? What if? Or maybe, what if we had paid more attention, been more compassionate to other people? What if we had honed in our values and our core priorities at an earlier point? What if we had paid more attention to what was going on around us and how we interacted and connected with it in the world? What if we had paid more attention to what it meant to be a person of faith? Have you ever done this? You ever been in that kind of emotional, mental place? I suspect you have, because it's only human. It's only human, and it gives to us a view, a review, a perspective of the past that we measure now with 20/20 clarity, because we know how things turned out. We become the armchair, the Monday quarterback, who knows all about what should have happened in the game the day before. And so we live in a culture that churns and churns and churns the past. Even in our spiritual journey, we do that mentally. But it takes us nowhere. It takes us nowhere except into an emotional, spiritual, mental cul-de-sac of yesterdays. And it causes us to slip into a half-hearted consciousness of this day, today, the day the Lord has given us. We miss it because we're so swept up and tied down by things that have already long passed. And when that happens, we also miss the full potential, the promise, and the hope of all our tomorrows, the days yet to come. It's not a great place to be, this negative what-if space, because it's usually triggered by moments of self-doubt or perceived failure or personal loss. You know, we're not in a good place when we already go into that room. And that relates to us this morning because I suspect this is the place, the space where the disciples were on that first Easter. You know, nothing had turned out the way they had anticipated or expected. Just several days before, Jesus had been arrested, and then he was sentenced to death, and not a particularly nice death, a degrading and unconscionable one on a cross. You know, crucifixion in that first century, and even for a while after, they didn't even use the word cross or crucifixion because it was like a swear word in culture. People were so appalled by it. I suspect that none, maybe a few, but most of the disciples saw their expectations dashed. And along with it, that what if I had done something different with the last 3 years of my life? This is not how I thought it would end. You know, what if we had never heard of him? What if we had just stayed home and continued fishing? The business was doing pretty good. What if we'd only paid better attention to what he said, particularly in these last few weeks as we journeyed from the Galilee to Jerusalem? He said a lot of things I think we missed. If we'd heard them, could things have gone differently? You know, I have to believe the disciples asked themselves this. What if? What then? Isn't it unfortunate? I think, at least, it's unfortunate that it always seems that it requires a crisis or tragedy before we evaluate and reevaluate and take seriously who we think we are, not who we pretend we are. What we profess we believe, rather than taking a hard look at the motives behind what we do in the name of what we say we believe. Evaluating what and what for we honestly live, what we would die for, who we might die for, apart from ourselves. These are hard questions, and they bear inescapable truths. Truths that we prefer to ignore or keep hidden, not talk about, and have a charade. Skim over them, look in the mirror, and see the person we have created, not always the person we are. But then life throws us a curveball in which we have no choice, and it is in those moments and those times that we either change or we go back to the very same routine, no different at all. You know, a lot of people debate and argue and discuss at this time of year. They're always looking for proof of the resurrection, proof of Jesus rising from the grave. And I've never felt that the argument or the issue rose or fell on was there a physical rebirth of Jesus in that fashion. Rather, a change that occurred within the disciples themselves. You know, prior to Easter morning, the disciples had run away, they had hidden, they had cowered in fear, they were filled with doubt, they denied, betrayed, and they now found themselves bewildered. That's the picture we get Friday, Saturday, and early Sunday. But on Easter and after Easter, just read the book of Acts. Things have changed. They are on the other side of whatever it was they experienced on Easter, and they were different. Oh, I suspect they still carried with them regrets and remorse, that kind of downer what if. But post-Easter, they flipped it around. They reversed it, turned it inside out. The what if became healthier, more positive. It became productive, and in that sense, holy. Their lives were inspired by Jesus' life, and their future became motivated by higher ideals and more significant purpose. When they get to the tomb, the scripture says they were greeted by someone who said, "Why do you look in shock at this empty grave?" Why do you look in shock in here? Isn't this what he told you would happen? Did you forget, or did you just not listen? Oh, well, it doesn't matter. That's over. Go. Go and tell others. And that's when Jesus' followers kind of came alive. They were resurrected themselves. That's when they began to experience what they had previously missed. And they must have asked themselves, okay, what if we take this seriously? What if we tell our friends and our neighbors? What if we lived the way we said we should? What if we took seriously the way Jesus lived? His ideals, his hopes, his compassion, they must have thought, what if we really put these to work? How would our world look if that were the what if that we asked today? How would it look? How different would our relationships be if instead of focusing and dwelling and being obsessed with the what if that is long gone and over, we thought about the what if we did things differently? What if we changed? What if we left in the tomb that which we know wasn't working and we know was causing division and pain and suffering? What if we left that in the tomb and said, what if we changed? Person to person, culture to culture, race to race, and nation to nation. What if? You know, with the arrival of the coronavirus, there have been a lot, and there will continue to be in the days and weeks ahead, a lot of what if. A lot of what ifs going around. You know, that's the society we have created. Second guessers, analysts, what if? You know, everybody's an expert when things are all said and done. What if we'd known sooner? What if we'd acted sooner? What if we'd taken the situation more seriously? You know, what would have happened then? Well, I understand that. And it's important to re-examine so that we learn from the past and we don't make the same mistakes. But when we play that kind of what if, it just leads us nowhere. And it takes us back to the blame game and the division and the incessant negativity that we have been suffering. Crucifying values, crucifying one another, crucifying the Spirit of Christ. You know, people over the past few years have said, you know, we just don't like the direction our country, our people are headed. We wish that folks would treat each other differently, be more compassionate, understanding, open, really listen. And then we blame others and say, well, if only those folks did it, things would change. But the reality is, and Easter reminds us, it is our responsibility. We are the ones that face that dead-end tomb that goes nowhere. And the angel says, "He is not here. Why do you look for him in this place?" And they go forth to follow a new Christ, the risen Christ. You see, Easter is about moving on. Easter is about burying the past, not forgetting it, but not dwelling on it, letting it go, forgiving ourselves, forgiving others, getting on with life, realizing, I hope that we have learned in this time, realizing that we need each other and that we have incredible pain when we live separated from each other. And that will not change and get better until we realize the power of being together and loving one another together and creating and making a better world together. And the big what if for this day that we should ask is not, as some would say, that this virus spells the end. What if this is the end of the world as we know it? But rather, we should be asking ourselves, what if this is the beginning of a new world, a better world, a door opening, a do-over that we get right, that those who follow the risen Christ get right? It's kind of interesting and a bit surreal to preach to an empty church. That's not exactly any minister's greatest aspiration, especially on Easter when, every church is packed wall to wall and we have so many people down at the beach for our usual sunrise service. And I still realize that, and understand that we are worshiping and being together spiritually, not physically. But this past week has been so surreal and for me kind of discouraging because it's hard to get psyched up for vacuous space. And then as I reflected upon it, I thought that, wait a minute, this might be the most profound Easter any of us have ever experienced. You see, just because these pews are empty doesn't mean that the church is not present, that the church itself is void. You may be at home, but you're not going to be there forever. You're out, so to speak, in the world. And many of you in this time have been doing some amazing, almost miraculous things to be in the world, to act in the world, to save the world, your neighbors, your friends, even the strangers on the street. I've seen people reach out, delivering groceries, taking Easter baskets to children, just making masks that they delivered to St. Anthony's Hospital, using connections they had to help the shortage in that regard. And friends, really, that's not merely what we should be about, but that's what the church is always called to be. That's where the church should be. Making a difference in the world, making a difference in other people's lives, caring always, every day, each day, not just in times of crisis or hurt or uncertainty. So we should ask ourselves on this day, on this Easter, when it's all said and done, what if? What if we just kept it up? Amen.